So let's continue. On slide 67, Chris Monckton talked about solar effects and the so-called smooth sunspot numbers. And the inference he's given is that we went from a minimum of solar activity to a maximum, and that's given us 300 years of warming. And why should we be concerned about greenhouse gas levels if the warming is due to solar impacts? Here he cites a paper, 2004, by Hathaway. So let's investigate this one. What about that paper? Well, here's a citation. David Hathaway. Here's what he wrote to me when I asked him. Pretty clear. And here's the actual email. So David Hathaway does not agree with the slide in which Chris Monckton referenced his work. This is an interesting one. Slide 69, Chris Monckton said that the IAU concluded in 2004 that solar changes cause most climate change, sun has caused today's global warming, it's not unusual, and the warming will end soon. And here, again, he's referencing the IAU 2004. IAU stands for International Astronomical Union. Let's see what they actually say. So, let's ask. I wrote to the president of the Division of Sun and the Heliosphere, and here's their reply. There is no such formal position endorsed by the IAU, let alone any claim from the IAU that suggests global warming can be explained by solar variability. So clearly, the IAU does not agree with the statement that Chris Monckton made on their behalf. Now, in slide 67, Chris Monckton talked about a publication or a submission, I think, by Willie Soon and others, 2009, which related solar radiance to mean surface temperatures. And as of his talk, this paper hadn't been published in a journal. It may have been published since then. I haven't investigated. But Willie Soon is a real scientist. He's a legitimate scientist. So what about his statement about the impacts of solar radiance and mean surface temperature? Well, let's see what the scientific community thinks about this. So here's a 2009 paper by two authors, including Gavin Schmidt at NASA, and they say that their analysis showed global warming is responsible for a negligible warming since 1980. What about others? Let's see. Here's another paper in 2009 that described a review of over 100 papers that show their conclusion that there's a correlation between sunspots and climate was not well-founded. And here are screenshots of the paper itself. Here's another recent paper, 2006, and again, here's a quotation and a screenshot of the actual paper. Here's another paper, 2008, and again, a quotation taken from the paper and a screenshot. Here's another paper taken, and I didn't include the year on this, the full citation. I'll try to add that and update this presentation as quickly as possible. But again, this paper talks about solar variability is unlikely to have been the dominant cause of warming during the last 3 decades. And here's another paper, this one from 2005, talking about global warming accounting for about 18% of the 20th century warming. I'm sorry, solar impacts accounting for 18% of global warming. Here's another paper, 2007, clearly state the impact of greenhouse gases have dominated solar influences over the second half of the last century. And here's another, 2006, again, saying the brightening of the sun is unlikely to have had a significant impact on global warming. And another, this is getting long, I just want to make it clear that the scientific community has pretty much settled this issue. And this one says that the sun could not have contributed more than 30% to the increases. Here's another one, 2007, and another one. So what about that Willie Soon 2009 paper? Could he have been wrong? Well, time will have to give that verdict. I think what we've seen is the vast majority of scientists disagree with him, but we really have to wait till the consensus fully emerges. I want to ask a different question, though. I want to ask about Willie Soon's funding history. I want to ask what organizations have found his work worthy of funding. And to do that, we take a step back through time. I'm going to go through a number of his papers. Here's a paper from 1993, and that paper was supported by the American Petroleum Institute, Mobile Foundation, and the Electric Power Research Institute. Here's a screenshot from the paper showing the acknowledgement sections with those organizations highlighted. What does this mean? it certainly doesn't mean that Willie Soon is preordained to give results that support these organizations. It does not mean that at all. It simply means that those organizations supported his work and provided financial support or maybe equipment. The interesting connection, though, is that these organizations do have a vested interest in this issue of climate change. I think these organizations would not want to see, for example, a cap and trade system or a carbon tax instituted. It does not, though, and I want to repeat this, it does not mean that Willie Soon is publishing work that is a priori supportive of these organizations' stances. It's simply a point of fact that he has received financial support from them for his work. And we'll continue investigating this on the next slides. And so continuing on, here's a 1994 paper that was by Willie Soon. This was published again by American Petroleum Institute, Mobile, and Electric Power Institute. And here's a screenshot from that acknowledgement section. Continuing, here's a 1996 paper. Again, here are the public supporters, and here's a screenshot from the acknowledgement section. Going forward in time, 2000 paper supported by the Electric Power Research Institute, and again, a screenshot. More modern papers, 2003, American Petroleum Institute, and here's a screenshot. 2005, supported by those organizations, and there's a screenshot. So who is Willie Soon? He is employed by the Science and Public Policy Institute, the same organization which employs Chris Monckton. Here's a screenshot of their webpage, and you can see both his name and Chris Monckton's displayed prominently. Willie Soon is also associated with the organizations on the left, in addition to those who supported his research. Now, this doesn't mean that Willie Soon's science is bad. It doesn't mean that Willie Soon's results are predetermined to support the views of the organizations that have funded him. I'm not saying that. However, it is pretty clear that Willie Soon and Chris Monckton's viewpoints contrast with the viewpoints of most climate scientists. Not all, but the vast majority of climate scientists. One of the real complaints a scientist would have with Chris Monckton's presentation is that he gives a lot of data without explanation or attribution. Maybe he just forgot. Yeah, that's possible. But the problem is he kept forgetting and forgetting and forgetting. So here are some of the slides where he forgot. Now, if you don't give attribution, it's hard for people to go and determine whether or not you were right. If you give a full citation, people can immediately go to the slide and they can, or get the journal paper or the conference presentation and assess the quality themselves. But if you don't give a citation, you make it really difficult. So here are some examples. This was slide 13, slide 21, slide 22, slide 23, slide 31. Again, these are sourced to the Science and Public Policy Institute, which Chris Monckton is a member of. Their chief policy advisor. But you can't cite, in my mind, you can't cite your own organization, particularly if they did not provide the data. You've got to go back to the original sources of the data, and that was not done here. Again on slide 32. Again on slide 45. And again on slide 46. So, I mean, who can we trust? You've got two presentations given by two different people, very different conclusions. Who are we to trust? Well, I'm asking you not to trust me and not to trust Chris Monckton. But here are some organizations you might want to start out with. There's an organization called NASA. You might have heard of them. You can go to their website. Here's their statement on climate change. NOAA, which is a international recognized organization on ocean and atmospheric climates. There's the National Academy of Science, NCAR, National Center of Atmospheric Research, American Meteorological Society, there's the EPA, and then there are others. Every one of these organizations has come out with very clear statements about the potential problems with climate change. And to think that someone like Chris Monckton could come in and he knows something that all of these other scientists who study this every day don't know, I think is a bit absurd. So I'm asking people to do their own work. Go to any of these sites. They're clearly listed here. And ask, what are these leading organizations saying about climate change? And you'll get a clear sense that there's a broad agreement on the issue of climate change and human impact on climate change. So who's right? I've completed my presentation, and I'll leave it to the public and the scientific community to decide. One of the reasons that motivated me to give this talk is it's really difficult for an audience to discriminate science facts, especially when they're given in a very rapid manner without citation. I have attempted to provide all my sources, and if for some reason people want more information, you can feel free to contact me. But you may ask, well, who has an agenda? I'm not going to say Chris Monckton has an agenda. I can tell you that this presentation, which I have prepared, was not funded in any way. I am a professor at a university. This has taken time away from my research activities, and it's cost me money. It's cost me a lot of time. So my agenda is to safeguard the future planet, and I'm happy to volunteer this time to make sure that the real science gets out there, accurate science, because I'll tell you what, we have some tough decisions to make, and we can only make good decisions if we really know the science. And that is my agenda. I also think we have more important issues to argue about. The more we argue about whether or not climate change is occurring, the longer we delay the tough decisions we have to make to mitigate it. We should be moving beyond this question, and we should be really dealing with mitigation efforts, not arguing about climate change, whether or not it's occurring. Again, thanks for listening. This is a long talk. I encourage people to contact me if they have questions, and keep in touch.